Uh, Jesus said, Adam came from great power and great wealth, but he was not worthy of you. For had he been worthy, he would not have tasted death. Jesus said, foxes have their dens and birds have their nests, but the child of humanity has no place to lay his head and rest. Jesus said, how miserable is the body that depends on a body, and how miserable is the soul that depends on these two. Jesus said, the messengers and the prophets will come to you and give you what is yours. You, in turn, give them what you have and say to yourselves, when will they come and take what is theirs? Jesus said, why do you wash the outside of the cup? Don't you understand that the one who made the inside also is the one who made the outside? All right, so not gonna lie, I had a considerable amount of difficulty going through these verses over the last week and a half. Um, so anytime that you guys feel like interjecting, please do so, please, because I would love to hear questions and comments. So verse 85, Jesus said, Adam came from great power and great wealth, but he was not worthy of you. For had he been worthy, he would not have tasted death. So we're going to talk in here in just a second about Simon Magus. This is actually one of the footnotes in the Nag Hammadi text. It says Simon Magus was called the great power of God, and it refers us to Acts 8 and 9, verses 9 through 10. It also referred us to the book called The Concept of Our Great Power. For the sake of time this evening, I will not be digging into that. If you guys are interested, we can study that book in the future. But for now, I'm going to leave that up to you to go and read it for yourself. You can find it on Scribed. It is under the Nag Hammadi scriptures, this version that was edited by Marvin Meyer. You can see that. This version here, plugging the piece on the front. And so from Acts 8, verses 9 through 10. But there was a certain man called Simon, which before time in the same city used sorcery and bewitched the people of Samaria, giving out that himself was some great one, to whom they all gave heed, from the least to the greatest, saying, this man is the great power of God. So when I looked at this text, I felt like these footnotes were kind of insufficient. Yes, Simon Magus was called the great power of God. But when you start to dig into this book, the concept of our great power, you see much more nuanced understanding of the great power of our God, in the sense that this is a power that lives within us, that we have access to. This is the power that Christ embodied. And just to give you a really quick understanding of how important it would be to have a look at this particular book yourself. And I can certainly provide online links to it if you would like to read it. But I will give you just the first few sentences. Whoever knows our great power will become invisible. Fire will be unable to consume such a person, but it will purify, and it will destroy all that you possess. For all those in whom my form appears from 7 days old to 120 years old will be saved. Upon them are placed these obligations to gather together all that is lost and the letters of our great power, that the great power may write your name in our bright light and bring the thoughts and deeds of others to an end. Then these may be purified, scattered, destroyed, and brought together in a place no one can see. You will see me and prepare your dwelling places in our great power. Come to know how what has gone has come to be, that you may know how what is alive will come to be, and know how to recognize this, and what that aeon looks like, what its nature is, and how it came into being. Why don't you ask what your nature will be, or how you have come into being? So this is just the first introductory paragraph to the concept of our great power. Again, it is well worth the read. I highly recommend reading it for yourselves, but just to kind of give you an idea, this is explaining what we were just talking about with regards to, having the Christ dwelling within us. Last week we read about the Gnostic cosmogony and how the world came into being from the Gnostic perspective. And I think that provides us some clarity and some understanding when we see how the power of God ultimately trickled down through the different aeons, through Barbello and the subsequent aeons, through the Christ, through to the Sophia to Yaldabaoth, and Yaldabaoth ultimately breathing that into the first man, or who we would call Adam, and then having that reawakened in him through the influence of Sophia. So this great power could be a reference to that kind of divine spark that trickled down through the Gnostic cosmogony. We have the potential to be in a position in which we will not be consumed by fire, but it will purify us. We have the power to be in a position in which we can have our names written in this bright light and bring these thoughts and deeds which are evil to an end. And notice the part where I said, you will see me and prepare your dwelling places in our great power. I want you to keep that in mind for this next verse. So verse 86, Jesus said, foxes have their dens and birds have their nests, but human beings have no place to lay down and rest. Okay, this is, if you look at this as a fox having a den or a bird having a nest, this is not just a place for it to sleep, this is its home, right? The foxes, they will raise their young inside the den. They will sleep inside the den. They will usually bring food back into the den to eat. So this is like their home. Now, human beings having no place to rest, that's because this earth, this physical creation, is not our home, right? The world is not our home. We're told regularly that we are meant to be in this world, but not of this world, even though we were created. If you look at it from, whether you're looking at it from the Genesis account or from the Apocryphon of John account, which is the Gnostic perspective, either way, mankind was created out of clay. And then they were given the breath of life. So they were created of physical material, but we as spiritual beings inhabiting this physical material don't really have any place to call home at this moment. And you can see this same sentiment being played out in both Matthew 8:20 and Luke 9:58. where Jesus is saying the exact same thing. Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but notice the wording changes here. The Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. Now, in the complete Gospels, the footnote here is human being. The Coptic here reads literally Son of Man. Elsewhere in the standard version, where this term is a title for Jesus, it is translated as the human one. But here, the term is not intended as a title for Jesus, but is rather the Semitic idiom meaning simply human being. Occasionally, however, the phrase may be used self-referentially as a circumlocution for I. So it could have been Jesus saying, but I have no place to lay my head. Or the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. But being aware also that this was a common idiom in that time period, just referencing a human being. So the translation here is uncertain. Could it be that it's specifically talking about the Son of Man or Christ having no place to lay his head? Could it be that humanity has no place to lay his head? Because in a different translation, it reads the child of humanity. That was the first translation that we read. So I'd love to hear thoughts, if you have any, in regards to this particular reference, the human beings or Son of Man or child of humanity. Who do you think it's referring to here?
I mean, at first glance, I thought it was referring to human.
Just humanity
Not,
in general.
yeah, that's. I mean, that was my first impression of it. Just reading it without necessarily giving it too much consideration.
Okay.
But I think that kind of ties in nicely with what you were saying about the fact that, you know, Earth is not our home. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I guess it could potentially have that other meaning as well. But to me, it felt the most natural that it was a reference to human beings. But yeah, I guess the jury would be out on it though.
Well, and you have to remember that we are reading a translation of a translation. Now, the biblical canon scriptures that we have been translated and translated and translated and translated from other translations. So, you know, it kind of loses meaning as it goes on. Whereas many of these Gnostic texts were only translated from Coptic into English or from Greek into English. So it's a less convoluted translation, I would say personally. So then going back to verse 85, then why wouldn't Adam be worthy? Why would he not be worthy of this same kind of the same thing that Jesus's disciples were worthy of, despite having come from great power and great wealth? If you want to know, you might have to rack your brain a little bit for our conversation from last weekend. Ooh, what if he isn't from our creator? Okay, Katie, flesh that out a little bit. Which creator are you referring to? Are we referring to the creator that we are introduced to in Genesis? Or are we referring to the creator that we are introduced to in the Apocrypha of John, the Yaldabaoth creator? platform. Yes, well, so, okay. So if we go back to the Gnostic cosmogony, remember that Yaldabaoth and his archons that he created saw an image of the heavenly Adam and tried to recreate it in the first man, Adam, that was made out of clay. But then once they saw that he was more spiritual than them, he was more intelligent than them, and he was more perfect than them, they separated from him that spiritual component into Eve. But Adam recognized that portion of himself within Eve immediately. Right? So God, the Most High, or as Caleb and I were talking about him today, the All Father. Right? This is actually a Norse mythology concept, the All Father. But I think it fits very well with the Gnostic cosmogony. Okay, so this All Father creates his wife, which is really just a mirrored reflection of him. This is his equal and equivalent counterpart, as if he were looking into a mirror. Okay. Then from there, they create the Christ. And then from there, they create Adam. And there are other steps along the way. There are other aeons that they create along the way. But for the sake of brevity here, they create the perfect man, which is the Pigera Adamus. Okay. This was the image that Yaldabaoth and his archons used to create the physical Adam that we are introduced to in Genesis, or at least that we think we are introduced to in Genesis. Remembering that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are two different stories. Okay. So if Adam is imperfect or insufficient, then he would not be worthy, right? And if we remember back to last week when we were reading this Gnostic cosmogony, as in John, in the Apocryphon of John, we see that Adam was lifeless until the aeons came and told him to breathe his breath of life into Adam, for one. And then for two, he was insufficient because he was made to drink the waters of forgetfulness, because he was separated from his counterpart of spirituality. So there's several different reasons that Adam may have been imperfect. The chief of those, though, if you remember, is that Yaldabaoth and the archons were so angry with the fact that he had this divine spark within him that they chose to make him mortal as a result. You guys remember that from last week? So how does that change your perspective then on why or why not he would be worthy and maybe would not have tasted death? Or does it change your perspective? None of you actually have to answer it. It's rhetorical, but feel free to if you have some ideas. I understand. So do you though remember that? Do you remember what we read last week about the Gnostic perspective of creation? Maybe. Okay. So knowing that he was created to be mortal because the archons were angry with him, and that he was separated from his spirituality, which was Eve, and that he was lifeless until he was breathed the breath of God. All of these things, I'm sorry, the breath of life, all of these things could have made him insufficient or unworthy. Would you agree? right, give it some thought. Okay, so I did want to point out some of these other references. So I have Plutarch, the life of Tiberius Gracchus, 9 verses 4 through 5, and Abu Hamid Muhammad al Ghazali, Revival of the Religious Sciences. I believe that's chapter 3, verse 153. I did not have a chance to locate those resources. So if anyone else can find those and share those later, I would so appreciate that. But you would be surprised how challenging it is sometimes for me to find some of these resources. And I have my ways, but it still is challenging. All right, let's go ahead and move on to 87 unless anybody has any thoughts or questions. Questions are okay too. Any questions? I know I'm throwing out a lot of words that you're like, what? Okay. All right. Verse 87. Jesus said, how miserable is the body that depends on a body, and how miserable is the soul that depends on these two. Interesting. So, first of all, if we move forward in the text, so still within the Lost Gospel of Thomas, when we go over to verse 112, we see Jesus said, damn the flesh that depends on the soul, and damn the soul that depends on the flesh. In verse 29, he says, if the flesh came into being because of spirit, that is a marvel. But if spirit came into being because of the body, that is a marvel of marvels. Yet I marvel at how this great wealth has come to dwell in this poverty. So again, we see this idea of wealth, right? We saw that over here with Adam. He came from great power and great wealth. But because of his position in the physical realm, because he dwelled within a body, he was impoverished. Now, what Christ is saying that if a spirit comes into being because of the body, that is a marvel of marvels. That's like a miracle. But if the flesh came into being because of spirit, then that in and of itself is still a marvel. But there's more to it. This idea that the soul relies solely on the body or vice versa is insufficient still. So you guys know how I feel about Paul, but I do want to point out what Paul said in Galatians 5, verses 16 through 18. He says, this I say then, walk in the spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary, the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would. But if ye be led by the Spirit, ye are not under the law. Interesting. So there's three things being discussed here. There's the soul, there's the spirit, and there is the flesh. In most religious and scholarly circles, there is agreement, generally speaking, that the soul and the spirit are two different aspects. What do you guys think?
It's a very interesting point to make. I've never really read or heard of the two being compared or it being suggested that they're separate. It's in most contexts, it's always been kind of considered to be one and the same. But I would be very interested in that being elaborated on, because it's yeah, I mean the soul and the spirit. I mean this this the I guess you could say the spirit of someone is maybe their drive and the forces which drive them and what have you, where the soul is. I don't know. I mean, I find it very difficult to kind of expand on them. Obviously, we've all got a kind of a notion of what they are, you know. And when you speak about the soul, and um, I guess that's kind of like the kind of fundamental mind of a person and the conscience of a person, the kind of conscious element of the personality. But is the spirit the kind of, would you say the spirit's like the drive of a person and the kind of the metaphysical force of life, the spirit,
Well,
whereas
okay.
the
So the way that it's commonly expressed is that the flesh is the physical body, usually tied to the ego. But okay, what Katie says here, the soul is consciousness and the spirit is our light. I would say that the soul would be closer to um, consciousness, but it's kind of like the halfway point between the physical body and the spirit. Whereas the spirit, I think what you're saying here with it being our light, the spirit is more closely connected to God. Does that make sense? Okay.
definitely, yeah,
Okay.
no,
So
definitely,
there's like intermediaries of ourselves. It's kind of like a if you look at the chakra systems, many people are aware of the seven chakras of the body, but not as many people are aware that there are actually more that reach out beyond our body. And I think these are different aspects of ourselves. You know, we talk a lot about how our mind is not necessarily the fullness of our consciousness, or that we as beings actually are bigger than what our physical bodies are. These are just kind of containers. I'd like to think of it as a lantern. The lantern is the container that holds the flame, but the flame emits light that expands out beyond the lantern. So that's kind of like our soul, but then it goes a step higher, a step further, and it's our spirit because we're more closely connected to God in that way.
but by that notion, then would it be fair to say that the soul is vulnerable, whereas the spirit is not?
Yes, I think so. And I think that's why we see a lot, especially in spiritual circles, about the soul being that which is fought over between good and evil, right? You know, the devil is trying to steal our souls, or people sell their soul, right?
Yeah.
This is that that midway point. I even wonder if it's more like what is it, the golden thread, Katie? I can't remember if it's gold or silver, but there's this thread that supposedly can, okay, the silver thread that connects us to our physical body from our spiritual selves. You know, if you think about it, the body tends to make decisions based on ego, preservation of self. And then there's this aspect of us that begins to connect with people on a more emotional or even subconscious level. But then we have this superconscious level, which is fully devoted to service to others, service to God. And this, I would think, would be spirit. So we have this kind of warring between these things, And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people have taken this to be, the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, and they put this information outside of itself. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I don't think I've ever read Insomnia. Thanks, Katie. I will look into that. But a lot of people put responsibility for their sinfulness. I use that word loosely, but for the things that they do, um, they put this. Oh, it was Satan's fault. Oh, the devil made me do it. I don't think that the devil is in and of himself an entity per se. I think that it's a state of being that drops down into those lower levels of consciousness, the ego, the fleshly desires, the carnal natures. That's what pulls us away from the truth of our spirit, that which is still deeply connected to God. Yes, our meat bags. We have to feed the meat bag. Okay. So I want to take a look at this little footnote here. It says, this obscure saying seems to comment on two levels of depravity, one in which one becomes mired in corporeal existence, and yet another in which even the soul fails to realize its freedom over against the body. In contemporary Platonic thinking, the human being contained body, soul, and mind, or spirit. Body and soul were both mortal, the mind or spirit immortal. Still, in some early Christian theologians, the soul could rise above the body if properly oriented to wisdom. This saying may warn against the soul's demise when dragged down by the body. Hopefully that provides some additional clarity. I still would kind of push against this idea in the Platonic mindset that spirit is mind. There's a lot of thinking, not just in Platonism, but also in Hermeticism, where they say that the all is mind, the universe is mental. And I think that who we would classify as the Almighty, the All Father, the Monad, the one true God, whatever name you want to put on him, I don't think that he is purely mind. And I feel like this idea of spirit is the existence of God within our being. Again, not just within our physical being, but in our being, in its totality. So body, soul, and spirit. I think mind is kind of a mixture of the three, body, soul, and spirit, because it depends on how the mind operates. So I'm not sure that I agree with Plato in this understanding of spirit in terms of it being mind. And you guys can feel free to disagree with me on that one, but
sorry. I'm inclined to agree as well. One of the kind of things I've wrestled with as a person of faith is how to contend with people and who are as an example, people who are like severely mentally disabled, or they've had some kind of injury which has really impaired them on a kind of on a mental level, and people who have suffered with things like dementia and that sort of thing, where slowly but surely their mind is reduced, and trying to marry that up to a concept of still having some kind of obviously connection with God, and also at kind of what point, when these people transition to the next place, at what point is there some recovery, or are they made whole again in another sense? And the best conclusion I came to was that the notion of this the spirit, that the fundamental underlying essence of people is this spirit which endures no matter what condition the mind, or even the body, or even the mind is. That there's that fundamental, that underlying fundamental connection, with the kind of the eternal, and with God. Yeah, I mean, it's the only way I can sort of contend with the idea of somebody. I mean, my grandmother had dementia, and watching her mind slowly dissolve, and her memories and her ability to communicate with other people, it does create something of an enigma, a problem with the notion of the afterlife, because you think to yourself, well, this is no longer a person, so what happens when they do transition? So I've always liked the idea that the soul, the spirit, is kind of the fundamental kind of underlying essence of a human being, if that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really good way to kind of um, flesh this out a little bit better in terms of the limitations on spirit of just calling it the mind. Because, like you said, when someone is in a diminished mental capacity, does that then make them somehow less of a spiritual being? I don't think so. I think that they absolutely have this spiritual essence about them that transcends any kind of mental limitations. And on top of that, I think that, if we look at someone who is dealing with things like dementia or autism or something like that, many people have kind of equated this to being sort of trapped in their mind. So they're still spiritually aware, they're still a whole being, but their mind has become sort of like a prison or limitation to them that it's not fully expressing in the way that their spirit needs to express. So I think that your example is a tremendous example as to why I would counter Plato's idea of spirit and mind. Yeah. Thank you for
Sure,
sharing.
it's like, no, it's fine. It's like it's the kind of the one thing that is unbreakable with a human being. The other things, as you say, can be broke. The body can be broke, the mind can be broke, the soul can be broke. But there's that. It's that kind of that kind of that part of a person which cannot diminish.
Yes, I very much agree with you on that. Katie, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share about that as well? I'm watching the chat. Um, okay, so the the concept here then is, kind of this idea of being mired down or weighed down by your fleshly vehicle. We understand that this is a vessel for our spirit and our soul, and it is very important. We need to care for it. We need to feed it. We need to give it water. We need to make sure that it rests, or it will not be a good vessel for which to carry the good news, right? If we are if we are meant to house the divine spark of the Almighty God, then we cannot be doing things to our bodies that are destroying our holy temple. God lives within the holy temple, and that holy temple is us. We do need to be sleeping well. We need to be eating healthy. We need to be getting plenty of water. We need to be doing breath work. We need to be getting exercise. We need to have healthy relationships, not just our physical body, but also our minds, our emotions. All of these things need to be well cared for in order for us to be a pure and holy temple. Okay, so just because Adam was not worthy, I think he was not worthy because he believed in his mortality, whereas we're being told not to rely on our body and not necessarily to rely on our soul either. We need to be able to rely on that which supersedes all of that, which is indeed the divine spark of God or the great power that lives within us. And when we look at the kinds of things that are commonly taught in churches, and I would say that no, I'm not trying to disparage the churches, but honestly, I feel like at this point, the churches do need to be called out for this because they are routinely telling people that they are deficient and that they are wretched, awful sinners. They say, accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, be baptized, confess his name. But that is still not doing work to maintain the vessel as pure and holy. It is relying on soul, right? What is the salvation? It is the salvation of our soul. So you're not supposed to be relying on the soul. You're not supposed to be relying on the body. You are supposed to be relying on that power that exists within you, or the Christedness. Okay? That which Christ embodied is the potentiality for all mankind, should they choose to go for it. And it's not an easy thing. I'm not saying that, just because you have this great power within you, that it's going to be a walk in the park. It wasn't for Christ either. I mean, think about it. He spent 3 years preaching his good news and being mocked and ridiculed. He spent 40 days in the desert being tempted by the devil. Ultimately, he was scourged horribly. Many historians believe that his entrails were showing as a result of how badly he was beaten with this whip that was called a cat o' nine tails. It had bits of glass and stone tied into it to cause severe damage to the body. It's no wonder that he could barely walk to carry his cross. Then he was hung upon a cross to endure one of the most excruciating deaths. It's not like he even made it look easy. But he realized his need to surpass the flesh. He realized humanity's need to see him surpass the flesh. He did not attempt to make it easy so that people were fooled. And yet, we have these churches now preaching that all we need to do is believe on Jesus and we will be saved. But what did Jesus teach? That's my whole thing, is if we are truly going to be followers of Christ, then we should be looking at what Christ taught. And he taught that it was action, that it was dying to self, not being focused on physical comfort, but being willing to realize your power and your potential, and that does not necessarily require the body. Yes, we take care of the vessel while we're here, but we have to be willing to let go of the vessel at any time for, I wouldn't just say for any reason, but for the idea of sacrifice for someone else in complete service to God. These are the kind of things that most people are missing. They like the feel good message of, just dunk your head under the water and say this little prayer and you're good to go. Don't even worry about what you do every other day of the week, just as long as you said your little prayer. I think that's a dangerous doctrine. Now, let's see what Jesus says in verse 88. The messengers and the prophets will come to you and give you what belongs to you. You, in turn, give them what you have and say to yourselves, when will they come and take what belongs to them? Okay, so first of all, let's look at this word messengers. The footnote here, by the way, the angel is typically referred to as a messenger. This is the translation in Greek. The Coptic here could also mean angels in the sense of heavenly messengers, as in Mark 8:38. But as in Greek, it may simply mean messengers in the ordinary sense as well. This is also found in Luke 9:51-52. Here it has been rendered in the latter sense because it is paired with prophets, an early Christian title for its itinerant creatures. So this could be angels, and that is commonly the translation used in Greek for angels is the word messenger. So it could be, but it's probably not likely. In this sense, it's probably more referring to preachers of that time period. So the messengers and the prophets will come to you and give you what belongs to you. You, in turn, give them what you have and say to yourselves, when will they come and take what belongs to them? So this is an interesting concept. What do you have that belongs to the preachers or the messengers? Well, let's go over to the Apocrypha of John, and I'm going to drop down to right here, read this portion. And I asked to know it, and he said to me, the monad, so the monad is the All-Father, basically, okay? The Almighty, the one true God. The monad is a monarchy with nothing above it. It is he who exists as God and Father of everything, the invisible one who is above everything, who exists as incorruption, which is in the pure light into which no eye can look. He is the invisible spirit, of whom it is not right to think of him as a god or something similar, for he is more than a god, since there is nothing above him, for no one lords it over him. For he does not exist in something inferior to him, since everything exists in him. For it is he who establishes himself. He is eternal, since he does not need anything, for he is total perfection. He did not lack anything, that he might be completed by it. Rather, he is always completely perfect in light. He is illimitable, since there is no one prior to him to set limits to him. He is unsearchable, since there exists no one prior to him to examine him. He is immeasurable, since there was no one prior to him to measure him. He is invisible, since no one saw him. He is eternal, since he exists eternally. He is ineffable, since no one was able to comprehend him to speak about him. He is unnameable, since there is no one prior to him to give him a name. He is immeasurable light, which is pure, holy, and immaculate. He is ineffable, being perfect in incorruptibility. He is not perfection, nor in blessedness, he is not in perfection, nor in blessedness, nor in divinity, but he is far superior. He is not corporeal, nor is he incorporeal. He is neither large, nor is he small. There's no way to say what is his quantity or what is his quality, for no one can know him. He is not someone among other beings, rather, he is far superior. Not that he is simply superior, but his essence does not partake in the aeons nor in time. For he who partakes in an aeon was prepared beforehand. Time was not apportioned to him, since he does not receive anything from another, for it would be received on loan. For he who precedes someone does not lack, that he may receive from him. For rather, it is the latter that looks expectantly at him in his life. In his light. Okay, so if we remember what happened in the Gnostic cosmogony, when God looked into the faces of the deep, he saw his mirrored reflection back, and that reflection was Barbello, the pronoia, or the first thought. This is the concept. In the beginning was the word being logos in Greek, logos meaning more than just word, but actual thought or idea. So she was the first thought or forethought, pronoia. And with that divine reflection of himself, he created all of the other aeons in each one, imbuing them with his perfection, but he surpasses all of that. Okay, so these messengers and these prophets that come to you and they give you what belongs to you, they give you this wisdom, this knowledge that you are this holy being that needs to walk as holy and live as holy because you have this divine spark in you. Meanwhile, you give it right back to them and say to yourself, when are they going to come and take what belongs to them? Are they actually meant to take anything from you? Or are they simply meant to live in their own fullness, just as you are? This is a tough verse, so take your time if you need to think about it a little longer, because not gonna lie, it's taken me a little bit. I've read this verse dozens of times. So I have here in my own notes, I have this wisdom and revelation, and we need to be sharing that. But when you share wisdom and revelation, you don't generally lose anything, right? Oftentimes we think that sharing the gospel somehow causes us to live in a deficit. It takes away from us. Usually that is in the corporeal sense. It takes away our time. It takes away our effort. We have to drive out to meet people or walk the streets to meet people to speak the truth to them. But when we look beyond just our physical bodies and the things that it takes from us in that sense, we see that by giving away the truth, we lose nothing. We still remain in our fullness. So perhaps maybe the messengers and the prophets were not receiving. Or perhaps the people who messengers and the prophets were coming to were thinking that they needed to give something back. But maybe the messengers and the prophets didn't need it because they were already full and they knew it. So there's different ways that you could take this particular verse. Anybody have any thoughts on it? Okay, if you don't. Let's sit with that a while. One more time. The messengers and the prophets will come to you and give you what belongs to you. You, in turn, give them what you have and say to yourselves, when will they come and take what belongs to them? Let's look at this. So one of the other scriptures that I was referred to via the Nag Hammadi translation was the authoritative discourse. This was found in Logion 32. The soul returned the body to those who had given it to her. They were ashamed, and those who deal in bodies sat down and wept because they could not do their business with that body, and that was the only commodity they had. They had gone to great pains to shape the body for this soul, and they had intended to bring down the invisible soul. Now they were ashamed of what they had done, for they lost what they had worked hard to accomplish. They did not realize that the soul has an invisible spiritual body, but they thought, we are her shepherd and we feed her. They did not realize that she knows another way hidden from them. This is what her true shepherd taught her in knowledge. So, this goes a little bit deeper. This is speaking specifically about the soul in the feminine aspect. And I wonder if this is loosely tied to the concept of Sophia or wisdom. Because this sounds an awful lot like what happened with Sophia or wisdom. She was kind of hidden away, if you will, in some branches of Gnosticism. You have to understand that Gnosticism has different types. There's Docetism, there's Sethian Gnosticism, there's Valentinian, let me say this, Valentinian Gnosticism, Marcion Gnosticism. So there was lots of different ideologies floating around the same time. Okay, this particular one could be the one in which Sophia was kind of hiding herself away in mankind, and Christ was coming to redeem her. So just keep that in mind. But generally speaking, I forget which belief system specifically, but in one of the types of Gnosticism, Sophia was, can't say the word here without getting the video taken down. She was assaulted by the archons, if you will. Just like what happened to Eve by the archons in the Gnostic cosmology that we read last week. Pretty sure I didn't say that, but check that video before I post it. But it rhymes with grape. Okay, you can figure that one out. So see, they were trying to do something with her body, but she knew another way. She knew a way that was hidden from them. She did not have to take part in their wickedness and their depravity. So this could be referring to Sophia in the sense of the soul. This is a common occurrence in several Gnostic texts about the soul kind of being hidden away in order to preserve and protect it. Any questions before we move on to verse 89? All right, last verse of the evening, verse 89. Jesus said, how miserable is the body that depends on a body, and how miserable is the soul that depends on these two. Oh, sorry, forgive me. Let me go back to Jesus said, why do you wash the outside of the cup? Don't you understand that the one who made the inside is also the one who made the outside? My apologies, my notes were long here. Okay, so why do you wash the outside of the cup? Don't you understand that the one who made the inside is also the one who made the outside? Now, normally I know I put the scriptures up here in pink. Unfortunately, the Blue Letter Bible was giving me a bit of a time today, so I had to pull from a different site. I have it as verses 25 through 26, but I want to read a little bit further back. Go back to 23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat but swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside also will be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. So now we have a better understanding of what Christ was trying to say when he was talking about the cup, right? How do you wash the outside of the cup? Don't you know that the same one that made the outside was the one that made the inside too? We go over to Luke 11, we're going to see relatively the same story. Again, we're going to skip down to verse 37. When Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. But the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash before the meal. Then the Lord said to him, now then, you Pharisees, clean the outside of the cup and dish, but instead you are full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But now, as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. So this is a slightly different interpretation, but again, provides us some additional clarity, right? Gives us some understanding as to what Christ meant by cleaning the outside of the cup and not worrying too much about the inside. He's not literally talking about the dishes. He's talking about making yourself right with God internally and not just putting on an act. You know, Christ talks about how the Pharisees stand out in the streets and say their prayers for everyone to hear. They do their giving out in the public so that everyone can see them do it. How often do we have that going on in our culture, in our society today? We have all of these wealthy people talking about how they've given millions of dollars to this charity and millions of dollars to that charity. Meanwhile, they're doing all sorts of awful things when no one's looking. These are the people that Christ warned about. He warned them. He told them, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and respectful places in the marketplaces, right? You're like unmarked graves, which people walk over without knowing. That's down in verses 43 and 44. And what did they say in response? Verse 45, teacher, when you say these things, you insult us. And he responds with, well, woe to you too, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. What kind of burden can you not carry? So I want to dig into that a little bit for just a second, because a lot of people have told me, oh, Jessica, what you're preaching, and I use that word loosely here, but just for the sake of understanding, what you're preaching is a works-based faith. People just need to say this prayer and be baptized and have faith and believe. Well, how much of a burden does one bear if A, they work hard to do their best to live a righteous life in the eyes of God and have faith that that's exactly what's happening in their lives, that that's exactly what Christ intended for them. And we can talk about that again, but we've talked about it a lot before. Back and watch the older videos. Or how much more of a burden is it to put on your fake face and go to church every Sunday and pretend while you're carrying around infidelity, you're carrying around addiction, all of these things that people hide and they put on a good front. What is the lighter burden? Is it harder to seek righteousness and seek first the kingdom and let everything else be added unto you as a result of that seeking? Or is it harder to lie and play pretend and try to keep your story straight? Which one is more challenging? You saw me do it for years, right? I was a mean and hateful person. I was an alcoholic, a drug addict. I was being wretched. But I was in church every Sunday, wasn't I? I played the part real well, didn't I? Mm-hmm. You know how hard that was? Keep that up? It was awful. You have zero poker face. Girl, I told you I'm a chameleon. I can be anything you want me to be. It's called survival mechanism. I had to learn how to survive in the environment in which I was raised. So improvise, adapt, overcome. But I could put on an act of the front, couldn't I? I dolled myself up real pretty every Sunday. But I'll tell you what, it was a weight and a half to carry. Billy can tell you. Do you remember the time that I just ran out of the house while y'all were eating dinner and you didn't know where I was or what happened and you were worried? I wanted to kill myself that night. That's how awful it was to carry that kind of a burden. Yes, you're right. Survival is what kicks in when our soul isn't nourished. And when you are living a lie and you are walking around in this facade of a life, we wonder why there are so many troubles within mankind. Whether it's, people who are committing crimes, people who are struggling with things like depression and anxiety. And please don't mistake this. I understand that those are very real things. I have struggled with them for many years. You're right. Your soul and your spirit have to be given the space to be free in order to even be nourished. It's kind of like okay, let's take a wellness thing here. If you have leaky gut, doesn't matter how many great nutrients you put into your body, you're still going to struggle with ill health because your gut cannot take up the nutrients it needs. So the first thing you have to do is heal the gut. And then you can take up the nutrients that you need. Okay. So it's the same thing with our spiritual life. If we are struggling with things mentally, physically, emotionally, then we have to be willing to examine what is it in our lives that we are continuing to allow us to be kept in bondage. Could it be a carnal desire? 9 times out of 10, it is. The other 1 time out of 10, it's just your ego being stubborn. But we go to things that are convenient and easy because we don't want to take the personal responsibility in dealing with those things. That was what I did with drugs and alcohol. I went to the things that were convenient and easy. They cost us a lot of money. They didn't really help, but they numbed it all so I didn't have to think about it. They weren't fixing the problem. It's kind of like, yeah, good old accountability and, and escapism, yes. It's kind of, so Dr. John Bergman is a great guy on YouTube, has a wealth of information of all things health related. And he talks about how our basic things like high blood pressure, high blood glucose, um, high cholesterol, even things like anxiety and depression are indicators for us. It's not that they themselves are the problem, they are like the warning lights on our dashboard that tell us that something is wrong with our vehicle. When we see the check engine light come on, we don't think, oh my goodness, there's something wrong with the light. We think, oh my goodness, there's something wrong with the engine, right? So these kinds of things, when they present themselves in our lives, we have to look at what could be the cause of it. A lot of times it's something as simple as needing to detoxify your body. Sometimes we need to detoxify our soul. We need to look at the things that we're putting into our minds, what we're listening to, what we're watching, what we're reading. We need to look at the people that we're spending time around. Are they bringing negative influence to us? Are they carrying around negative energies or entity attachments? And yes, this is a thing. What are we carrying around? Are we carrying around negative entity attachments? I mean, we've seen that firsthand too, haven't we? Scary stuff can attach itself to your sweet spirit and completely derail wherever you're at any given time. This is why we're told to always be vigilant and to be wise like serpents, but innocent like doves. We're to be aware of the things that can drag us back down into the pits of hell, that can tether us back to our carnal nature in an instant. And this is something that happens regularly. Katie, case in point, yes, walking the middle path, but Katie, I'm going to use you for a second, okay? The Phillies. Those dang Phillies, right? It was just so simple. You knew you shouldn't eat them, but they were so delicious, you ate them anyway. And it was such a minor thing, right? But how did it make you feel afterward? It felt like it set you back, right? They were good in the moment. They were freaking delicious in the moment. I'm sure of it. I know this. One of those things that's a major weakness for me is food. But mentally and emotionally, they set you back. Now, do you see how that can become such a simple and unassuming bondage on your spirit? It's so simple. And these are the things that we always have to be vigilant for. Always have to be aware of things that seem innocuous, but can be detrimental to our well-being long term. Because even though it may not have done like horrible damage, like yeah, it might have affected you on a cellular level. It might have made you a little bit slower, a little bit more sluggish, or whatever. But ultimately, your body will repair itself. You can detoxify your body; it will repair itself. But still, it did a number on you because you beat yourself up over it. Now, if it didn't have that emotional charge, maybe it wouldn't be an issue for you. So that's why everyone is unique. Everyone needs to look at the things in their lives that are potential triggers or weaknesses to throw them back into that state of physicality, living in the physical. And there's nothing wrong with being a foodie, right? Plenty of people that are foodies that eat like uber healthy. It's a matter of the kind of weight that you allow that thing to have in your life. So maybe you do drink alcohol, but it's not an everyday thing or even an every week thing. So is that necessarily a problem for you? It might not be. You know, maybe you do enjoy a little television once in a while, and it's not like you're letting it consume every moment of your life. But if it is, and you're not separating yourself from that in order to seek your spiritual evolution, continuing to invest in yourself, whether it's through meditation or breath work or reading the Bible or whatever it might be, that keeps you grounded and keeps you moving forward in a place where you are comfortable with yourself, then you need to evaluate whether that's something that you want to maintain in your life. Too much of anything is not a good thing. I believe all things in moderation. But if they carry some sort of an emotional charge with them, then it might be good to avoid them entirely. For me, that's alcohol. I know that generally speaking, I can have a drink here or there, and I'm not like an angry drunk or anything. But personally, I know where that leads, and I want no part of it. That doesn't mean that the desire doesn't ever present itself. It does. But that's one of those things that I know I need to avoid in order to stay on the path I'm on and feel good about where I'm at. Still beating myself up about eating too much sometimes. But again, one of those things I'm working on. So everyone's different. I'm not telling you that you can't do this or you can't do that, or you have to find where you feel like you are right with God, how you are choosing to live out your faith walk, how you are choosing to follow the directives that Christ gave to his followers. Whether or not you even believe those things is going to be a major part of that. Maybe you don't believe some of the things that he shared. Maybe you don't believe the teachings of Paul. Maybe you don't believe anything about Christianity at all. maybe you prefer a completely different religion. Whatever that looks like, you have to be fully committed to your own refinement. If not, you're just going to have this ongoing battle with yourself. And it's going to turn into any number of things. We show up each day for ourselves, our family, and our creator. That matters and changes each day on how it looks. Ebb and flow. Exactly. Exactly. We are all works in progress. It is an ebb and flow. And find that rhythm, that flow. It's very liberating. And you don't have to be so completely miserable with your life. It's the story of Buddha, right? Buddha didn't find ultimate understanding and happiness and everything in having all of the wealth that he could possibly have any more than he found it in not having anything at all. He found it somewhere in the middle. So whatever that looks like for you, own it. Be willing to believe that the outside of the cup needs to be just, it needs to be dependent on the cleanliness of the inside of the cup. You got to clean the inside of the cup first. If you're carrying around guilt or fear or worry or doubt or whatever, that's going to display itself on the exterior. All right, we're almost done here. Any questions, any thoughts? Okay. All right, so this is from the Babylonian Talmud. Okay? It's a little bit different. But why should he not also shift to one side anything which would not be spoiled and say the blessing? Because it says, my mouth shall be filled with thy praise. Archista was asked, if one has eaten and drunk without saying a blessing, should he say the blessing afterwards? He replied, if one has eaten garlic so that his breath smells, should he eat more garlic so that his breath should go on smelling? Pravina said, therefore, even if he has finished his meal, he should say the blessing retrospectively, since it has been taught. If a man has taken a ritual immersion and come out of the water, he should say on his emerging, blessed be he who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning immersion. This, however, is not correct. In that case of immersion, the man at the outset was not in a fit state to say a blessing. In this case, the man at the outset was in a fit state, and once it has been omitted, it must remain omitted. So basically, he's saying, if you're getting ready to be baptized, so to speak, the ritual immersion was actually a quite common practice in the Hebrew culture, always has been. The Christians turned it into baptism, but this has long been a practice in many different religions. Just it's a ritual purification. I forget what it's called. The mikvah, I believe, it's a mikvah bath. Okay, so it's a ritual cleaning of oneself prior to partaking in certain activities that would be considered holy or sacred. It's kind of like taking a shower before you go to church, sort of like you want to be clean and presentable for when you're around God. But what Christ was teaching in his teachings was it didn't matter if the outside looked good, what's the inside look like? And in this instance, this rabbi here is basically saying that prior to going into the ritual cleansing bath or this immersion, the person was not clean and pure. So he had to say the blessing afterwards. Whereas with eating the garlic or eating the meal, you can still bless the meal afterward. You're still in the same state. Now, think about when we're told that in order to bring your offering before the Lord, you have to first go to your brother or sinner and ask for their forgiveness. If you've done something wrong to a brother or sister, and you need to repent for that, you need to ask forgiveness for that, you need to do that before bringing your offering to the altar. You also need to be willing to forgive them before bringing your offering to the altar. Otherwise, your offering isn't really that great. And it all is based on condition of your heart. Same as this. The inside of the cup is the condition of your heart. Where is your heart? If your heart is in the wrong place, it doesn't matter what you're doing on the outside. You can put on the best front in the world. If you're looking like garbage on the inside, garbage is going to show through on the outside. And that's the whole point of my little tangent about taking care of your body and finding that which is the path for you, whatever that looks like. And I don't think it's going to be the same for any one person. I think corporatized religion is just as bad as corporatized education. You can't just say it's a one size fits all kind of thing. You have to be willing to make it your own and truly reflect on the condition of your heart as a result. Thanks for joining us so much, John. As always, we always love your input, and we had a nice chat earlier. Rest well, my dear, and we will see you again soon. Have a nice day tomorrow as well. Thank you. Bless you as well. What we fill our cup up with is what spills out when life gives us lemons. Yeah, exactly. When life gives us lemons, do we just drink bitter lemon juice, or do we make it into something delicious? Personally, I'm not a big fan of lemonade. I would prefer to make like blueberry lemon bars or something because they're much more tasty. But you're right. Look at what Christ said about that. He said, that which is in the heart is what flows out of the mouth. It's not what goes into the mouth that defiles the man, it's what comes out of it that defiles the man. Because it's the outpouring of the heart. If we have evil in our hearts, if we're filled with bitterness and resentment, then we're going to have bitterness and resentment come out. It doesn't matter how pretty the outside is. We can dress up in fancy $1 million ball gown and still talk trash to someone. Now, the other reference that we got was the Babylonian Talmud, Kelim 25, 1-9. I could not locate that either, so I'm going to have to do some digging on that one. But our final reference for the night is Oxyrhynchus. This is the 840 Gospel, and this is the Recto 23-45. So the first part of this Gospel is called the Verso, and then this is the Recto. So it's kind of like a dialogue. The Verso is kind of like what comes first, and then the Recto is the response, so to speak. Then, being here in the temple, are you clean? He said to him. I am clean, for I bathed in the pool of David, and after going down by one set of stairs, by another I came back up. And I put on white clothes, and they were clean. And then I came and looked upon these holy vessels. Replying to him, the Savior said, Woe to blind people who do not see. You bathed in those gushing waters in which dogs and pigs have been cast day and night. And washing yourselves, you scrub the outer layer of skin, which also prostitutes and the flute girls anointed and bathe and scrub, and put makeup on to become the desire of the men. But from within they are filled with scorpions and all unrighteousness. But I and my disciples, whom you say have not washed, we have washed in waters of life, eternal, coming from the God of heaven. But woe to those. So now we have an even deeper understanding. This person that Christ is speaking to is a Pharisee, and he explains to him that he did the whole ritual purification thing, where he went down by one set of stairs, came up by another, he put on white clothes, he was all nice and clean. And Christ was like, you don't really know where those waters came from, do you? That's where the dogs and the pigs are going in and out. That's where the prostitutes are bathing. Are you kidding me? That is not the kind of water that I'm talking about. You think you're clean just because you took a bath. That ain't it, brother. So when the Pharisees were upset with Christ and his disciples for not washing before the meal, he called them out on it. You're worried about what the outside of the cup looks like, but y'all haven't bothered to clean the inside of the cup. Whereas we have washed in the waters of life that are eternal, and they're coming from the God of heaven. Notice he says the God of heaven there. So we can do all sorts of things to change the outside. And this can include the things that we were just discussing. It can include, what we're eating, whether we're exercising, whether we're sleeping. It can include all the things that are keeping the vessel good. Not to say that you shouldn't do that, but don't neglect the inside of the cup. Think about it. If you had a cup that you wanted to drink out of, but someone else had drank milk in it and left it sitting on the table for 3 days, would you just wash the outside of the cup? Would you? No, you'd wash the inside of the cup because ew, who wants to drink out of that cup? Right? Now you're looking for your milk cup, aren't you? I make sure it gets washed regularly. See what Katie says. It's gross. Exactly. That's disgusting. Nobody, but still, you do the inside. You don't just wash the outside. That's because you want whatever's coming out of the inside to be pure, okay? To be clean. Ooh, that's disturbing. I'm sorry that you had to experience that, Katie. Curdled milk is very unpleasant, yes. We have work to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be hard. It can be. We choose to make it hard. But what did Christ say? His yoke is easy, his burden is light. And in some translations, I love that he said, his mastery is easy, or his lordship is easy. Following him is easy. It may seem challenging to our flesh, because that is what we need to bring into submission. That is what we need to bring under his lordship. Continuing to live by our fleshliness is not beneficial to us in any way. It will cause us to backtrack. So while we are tending to our souls and our spirits, we should also be working to tend to our physical bodies. Does that mean you are suddenly going to make all of these changes overnight? No, but according to many scholars, Christ didn't either. Think about all the years that he was gone, from the age of 12 to the age of 30. That's 18 years that we don't hear about Christ in the Bible. But it's not 18 years that we don't hear about Christ anywhere. There's been several things that would suggest that Christ spent time in the East, over in Asia, India somewhere, or maybe even as far as China. There's evidence of Christ all over that area. Yeah, he was on his own pilgrimage. He had to learn to submit his flesh to his will. We can will better things for our flesh. We can choose the right path. And everything is a choice. Every day is an opportunity to pick that which is going to heal us, strengthen us, purify us, cultivate our spirits, and ultimately be in service to God, to others, and to the kingdom as a whole. So, despite the fact that these verses were rather challenging for me for the last week and a half, I feel like we made it through them reasonably well. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording unless you have anything you would like to add. Katie, do you have any questions? Anything you'd like to add? Okay, yeah, we're going to get into prayer time now. Stop the recording. Thanks everyone for joining us.